Dim the lights, grab a blanket, and brace yourself for chills.
Welcome back to AI Girl's Scary Stories. In part 1, when Yangsha woke up, Siyunfei had not visited her anymore. But every day, Leihao brought some fruit and a bouquet of lilies, saying nothing, only showing a strange smile that made Yangsha shiver. Half a month later, the doctor finally said she could be discharged from the hospital. Yangsha looked at the weary face of the doctor and thought that if she didn't leave soon, he might just collapse. She nodded and agreed to leave the next day. She arranged for Li Yu and Siren to come pick her up from the hospital in the morning. Yangsha sighed in relief and put down her phone. That phone was one her grandmother had bought for her after selling a pair of earrings when she was in high school. It didn't have many functions, but it worked well and had lasted for years without breaking. From the moment she got that phone, she vowed never to let her grandmother sell her treasured jewelry again. But now, she sighed lightly. The hospital bill was not cheap. Although Chu Yunfei had helped her cover it up front, it was still someone else's money, and she would have to pay it back. It seemed she needed to find a part-time job soon. The night was deep, and the hospital was quiet. Even with the windows closed, they could hear the cicadas chirping, their calls melodious and lingering. She lay down and recalled the events from half a month ago. Chu-man hadn't come to see her during these days. Siren and Li Yu always said she was busy and out of the house. So, was that day's incident really just a dream? Yangsha rubbed her aching forehead. She had never been able to see through Chu-man. Who exactly was she? At some point, the cicadas' calls outside stopped. Drowsily, Yangsha thought she heard a rustling sound, like countless insects crawling. The sound was familiar. She seemed to have heard it somewhere before. Yangsha suddenly sat up in bed. She had only heard that sound once, but it was likely etched in her memory for a lifetime. It was from Zhonglei's MP4, accompanied by the screams of several boys, leaving an indelible impression in her mind. Yangsha shrank back, her body covered in goosebumps. That bug was coming for her life. Instinctively, she reached for the knife under her pillow, but then remembered she was in a hospital. She swallowed hard, staring at the dim yellow door, her heart racing. The sound of crawling insects grew closer. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the door, as if someone was forcefully slamming against it. Yangsha quickly wrapped herself in the blanket. She knew it wouldn't help and that it was somewhat embarrassing, but at that moment, she couldn't care less. The banging stopped, and Yangsha was startled, raising her head in confusion to look at the door. To her surprise, the doorknob began to turn slowly, emitting a faint creaking sound. It was easy to imagine how terrifying such a sound was for Yangsha. She clutched her collar tightly, her nails nearly piercing through the thin cotton fabric. Click! The door opened, and a person in a white coat walked in. It was the doctor. Yangsha breathed a sigh of relief, wiping the cold sweat from her forehead. "Doctor, it's you." "Strange," the doctor said, looking around in confusion. "I thought I heard the sound of insects crawling just now, but now it's gone." As soon as he finished speaking, Yangsha felt a chill run through her body. She saw an insect, a gigantic insect, slowly emerge from the side of the door. It had eyes as large as copper bells, sharp teeth, and 8 furry legs. "Spider," Yangsha screamed, her face turning pale. Yes, it was a spider. A spider taller than a person. She finally understood why there were no bugs in Qinyuan building. Spiders lived by eating bugs, and such a huge spider wouldn't have enough bugs to eat. The doctor turned around abruptly and, upon seeing the enormous creature, his face turned white. But before he could scream, the spider reared back, its body contracting, and it spewed countless tiny spiders from its mouth, surging forward like a tide, instantly crawling up his body and rushing into his mouth. Then Young-sa heard the sound of organs being chewed. At that moment, she understood why all the corpses had no innards, yet their appearances were intact. The tiny spiders quickly crawled over the doctor's corpse, heading toward Young-sa. Terrified, she covered her head and screamed. She wanted to escape, but in such a tight encirclement, there was nowhere to run. At that moment, a circle of white light suddenly flashed around the bed, encasing it like an eggshell. The tiny spiders ignited and burned upon contact with the barrier, filling the ward with a nauseating smell of roasted flesh. The giant spider let out an angry roar, resembling a beast. At the same time, a white figure passed through the wall and walked in quickly. Young-sa was astonished to see her. The white dress and wavy hair were so familiar. However, behind her trailed a massive tail, its white fur swaying softly in the air. A mysterious and cunning creature immediately sprang to Yang-sa's mind, causing her already pale face to turn even whiter. "Feast. Last time you escaped. This time I won't show mercy." Chuman's expression turned cold, and a long sword wrapped in white light appeared in her hand. She lunged forward, aiming for the spider's forehead. In that instant, Yen-sa clearly felt the deep-seated fear emanating from the spider as it spat out countless tiny spiders at Chu-man and turned to flee. Chu-man swung her sword, and a beam of white light cleaved through the wall of spiders rushing at her, swiftly darting out. Then, Young-sa heard a heart-wrenching scream, and outside the door, a green rain began to fall, thick and foul-smelling. Young-sa's heart finally reached its breaking point. Her vision went dark, and she collapsed backward, feeling utterly useless in that moment. Chu-man, dressed in white, returned to the ward, not a speck of dirt on her. She walked to the bedside, looking at Young-sa, who had fainted on the bed with a knowing smile on her lips. When she awoke again, it was already the next morning. The scenes from last night were still vivid in her mind, yet there were no traces of any spiders in the room. She asked the nurse about the doctor's whereabouts, and the nurse smiled, telling her that the doctor had left the hospital yesterday afternoon to return to his hometown. Yang-sa listened in confusion, thinking she must have had a terrifying nightmare. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, her 3 roommates arrived on time. Liu dramatically gave her a hug that felt like a century long and then stuffed a bunch of snacks into her hands. Yang-sa glanced at them. They were all her least favorite puffed snacks. Siren, being a lady, didn't act as exaggeratedly as Liu. She held a bouquet of white roses in front of Yang-sa, beaming a charming smile and saying, "Welcome back." Last was Chu-man. She pushed open the door and walked up to Yang-sa. Remembering the long white tail from last night, Yang-sa instinctively took a step back, her eyes revealing suspicion and fear. "Aza, it's so good that you're okay," Chu-man said as she pounced on her, hugging her tightly. With her delicate lips close to Yang-sa's ear, she spoke in a mocking tone, "Little girl, if you dare to reveal my secret, I will gouge out your eyes and cut out your tongue, leaving you unable to live or die." Yang-sa's heart raced, her eyes rolled back, and she fainted on the spot. She hadn't been wrong. Chu-man was indeed like that mysterious and cunning creature, both sly and cruel. Hateful fox. The night city was filled with an ambiguous scent. From above, it looked like a dark ocean dotted with colorful diamonds. 2 stylishly dressed girls walked out of a bar, the sweet scent of cocktails lingering around them as they chatted and laughed on their way back. There were few pedestrians on the street now, with only 2 rows of mock 18th century European streetlights still shining brightly. But no matter how bright their glow, in the face of the eternal darkness, it was merely the flicker of a firefly. My stomach. One of the girls with long hair suddenly bent over, her face turning pale as if in great pain. My stomach hurts so much. What suddenly caused the pain? The other girl said in surprise. Should I take you to the hospital? No, it's fine, Xiaojian. The long-haired girl looked around and finally spotted a small, isolated building in the corner. I might have eaten something bad. I'll just use the restroom and be right back. Such a lazy person, the girl named Xiaojian complained quietly. All right, just come back soon. Got it. The long-haired girl covered her stomach and rushed into the public restroom. Xiaojian, feeling bored, sat down on the steps by the street, took out a mirror from her small purse, and began to touch up her makeup. After an indeterminate amount of time, she grew impatient and frowned as she stood up from the ground. What's taking Xiaoming so long? Did she fall into a pit or something? She said, heading toward the restroom. As soon as she stepped through the restroom door, a cold wind hit her face, bringing with it a foul odor. She cursed softly, covering her mouth and nose with her hand as she walked inside. The restroom lights cast a dim yellow glow, illuminating the stalls in a bizarre and eerie manner. Xiaojian felt an inexplicable sense of panic rising within her, and she called out tremblingly, "Xiaoming, are you in there?" No one answered. Only the low sound of the wind responded. Did you hear? Someone went missing again last night. A girl sat atop a desk in the classroom, speaking vividly. This is already the third incident this month. People just vanish for no reason. Isn't that creepy? Stop it. I have goosebumps all over. A timid girl crossed her arms, her eyes filled with fear. Yeah, it's dangerous to be out at night. I'm not even going out to work this Saturday. Yen Sa sat behind them, applying floral water to her arms while angrily saying, "Damn it, these bumps are like a rash. There are so many mosquitoes. If I had known, I would have had Chu-Man leave that spider spirit behind. Even catching mosquitoes would be better than this." Just as she finished speaking, she sensed the strange atmosphere around her. Looking up, she saw several girls turning their heads together, staring at her with suspicion in their eyes. What? Yan Sa looked at them awkwardly, stuttering for a moment. I read a fantasy novel yesterday, and the spider spirit in it was incredibly powerful, spitting out a flood of spiders with just one mouthful. You read such a cliché plot? The girls snorted dismissively and turned back to their gossip. Yen Sa let out a heavy sigh of relief and continued to apply the floral water to the bumps on her skin. Do you really want to keep that spider? A head suddenly popped up beside her ear. She turned and was startled to see a familiar face. Chu-Man, why do you look like you've seen a ghost? Lu Chu-Man elegantly sat down beside her. Is it because I'm a monster? There are more monsters in our dorm than just me. What are you talking about? Her last sentence was so soft that Yang Sa didn't catch it clearly, so she asked, "What did you say?" Chu-Man didn't answer, but simply looked at her, a strange smile in her eyes. Yang Sa gazed at her face and felt she was becoming more enchanting. That captivating allure didn't stem from her looks, but from an innate charisma. "Why haven't I seen you at the student council office lately?" Chu-Man said with a slight smile. The student council office? Yang Sa furrowed her brows. What would I go there for? Chu-Man smiled mysteriously. Of course, there's someone there worth your visit. Yang Sa rolled her eyes and pouted. Are all you foxes so nosy? Chu-Man laughed exaggeratedly. Do you know what your expression just now looked like? What? You look like a duck stepped on the neck, ha 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 ha. She laughed heartily without regard for her image, causing Yang Sa to feel a headache coming on. Why did she have to encounter such a weirdo? By the way, Chu-Man stopped laughing. I'm taking you to meet someone tonight. Who? You'll know when you see them. Chu-Man winked at her. I'm skipping class and will come pick you up tonight. Yang Sa watched her brazenly justify skipping class and couldn't help but feel a surge of resentment. No, I have to hold back. Yang Sa gritted her teeth. She was a fox. She absolutely couldn't offend her. Otherwise, given the fox's vengeful nature, she would definitely regret it later. So, Chuman's skipping class again? Liu sat down beside Yang Sa with a few books in hand. She has the luxury to skip, Yang Sa said helplessly. A fox that could cultivate into a human must be over 100 years old, right? So, didn't that mean she knew much more than the teachers? Besides, she didn't have to worry about job prospects in the future. Being a monster was great. By the way, Asa, Liu said, I found a tutoring job and might be back late tonight. Tutoring? Yang Sa suddenly remembered she needed to find a part-time job and felt overwhelmed. Why was she so unlucky? You should be careful. She suddenly recalled the missing person incidents the gossiping girls had mentioned and said worriedly, it seems really unsafe outside lately. Why don't you let Siren accompany you? Liu glanced at Siren, who was engrossed in reading, seemingly impervious to danger, and laughed, no need. Do you really think I would get into trouble? That's true. Yang Sa nodded. With Liu's skills, it was likely that if any danger arose, the unfortunate ones would be the thugs. Most of the Chinese department classes were concentrated in the morning, making the afternoons the most boring time for Yang Sa. The weather was hot. All she could do was read in the dorm. She bought a stack of newspapers, only to look at the job ads. She was shocked to find that she was truly at a loss. Not only did she lack the required qualifications and skills, but even her height and appearance didn't meet the job requirements. Did this mean she could only work as a cleaner besides tutoring? Suddenly, her eyes lit up as she was drawn to a recruitment at the size of a tofu block. The ghost bar was hiring waitstaff. The working hours were from 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. with a base salary of 900 yuan plus commissions. It seemed like a decent job. Yen Sa's heart stirred as she carefully cut out the tofu-sized ad with scissors and tucked it into her jeans pocket. If she could really get this job, her life would be much easier. Around 6 o'clock, Chu Man finally returned, leading Yang Sa through winding streets. After passing several intersections, they finally arrived at a small alley. Yang Sa stood in shock, staring at the familiar alley. It was the very place where she had been injured a month ago. Why was Chuman bringing her here? At that moment, she recalled that she had ended up here that day because she was following Chuman, and it seemed that Chuman knew everything. What are you standing there for? Chuman waved from the alley. Hurry up, we're almost there. Looking at Chuman in her white outfit, Yang Sa suddenly thought of a Korean horror movie where the ghost would beckon passers-by into a deep alley and then kill them. The thought sent chills down her spine. Hurry up. Don't waste time. We need to drink tea. Chuman urged anxiously. Drink tea? Although Yang Sa didn't fully understand, it seemed Chuman didn't intend to eat her. Well, she might as well go see what was happening. The alley was deep, with ancient stone walls covered in moss on either side. Yang Sa could hardly believe there was an antique shop here. Bamboo curtains made of xiangfei bamboo, cherrywood tables and chairs, palace lanterns decorated with landscape paintings, filled with historical relics, and exquisite bronze incense burners emitted an ancient fragrance that seemed to come from a distant past. What surprised Yang Sa the most was a young woman wearing a Han Dynasty-style dress. She stood by a round wooden table, adding incense to the burner. The light blue dress was embroidered with white patterns, and the edges had cloud patterns woven with silver thread, looking elegant and noble. Yang Sa almost felt as if she had traveled through time to 2,000 years ago. Is that you, Asa? The young woman smiled warmly, her smile bright and inviting. Come, sit down. You. Yang Sa gazed at her attire, unable to look away. My name is Ju Yan, the woman said, using an incense spoon to place some thoroughly burned charcoal into the burner, then evenly sprinkling on some special incense powder. I wear clothes like this at home, from various dynasties. Lady Ju Yan, it's almost time for the evening tea. Hurry up, Chu Man urged. I've been waiting for a long time. What are you worried about? Ju Yan poked a few holes in the incense powder with her incense chopsticks, then placed a silver leaf on top. Finally, she took out a fragrant pill from a red bag embroidered with a golden phoenix and crushed it into a fine powder. She pinched a small amount between her thumb and index finger, sprinkled it on the silver leaf, and then covered the burner with its lid. This fragrant pill is made from a secret formula passed down from the Chu kingdom, the most precious ingredient being the magical herb collected from beneath the feet of the goddesses of Wushan. Other ingredients like ginseng and lingji are commonplace. To drink Jiuyin tea, this yaoxiang is indispensable. Jiuyin tea? Yang Sa asked in surprise. What kind of tea is that? Why haven't I heard of it before? This tea is not of this world, so of course, you wouldn't have heard of it before. Zhu Yan smiled. She brought out a tea tray from the inner room, which held a set of intricately carved purple clay teapots, resembling the famous, along the river during the Qingming festival. This set of tea utensils, though made in the Ming dynasty, was crafted over 5 generations by the Lu family of the Zisha-making lineage, and it doesn't tarnish the reputation of this ancient tea. Saying this, she poured a cup for Yang Sa and Chu Man, placing them in front of them with a gentle smile. Please. Yang Sa picked up the teacup, and a wave of exotic fragrance hit her, mingling with the yaoxiang in the air, intoxicating her senses. She felt a bit dazed, and as she took a gentle sip, the deep aroma lingered on her lips, as if clusters of flowers from the underworld bloomed in her mouth. Jiuyin tea comes from the underworld, Zhu Yan said softly, watching as the 2 girls leaned over the table, already deeply asleep. It is made from the manjasaka flowers along the Yellow Springs Road, the female chief flowers by the River of Forgetfulness, the joey grass from the deepest part of the 18 levels of hell, and the empress flowers that bloom once every 3,000 years on the reincarnation path, roasted under the fire of the underworld. Its effect is, Zhu Yan's lips curved into a murky and mysterious smile to allow the drinker to return to their past life, reliving a life that may have been happy, enchanting, unfortunate, or mundane. Li left the student's house around 9 o'clock. She dragged her weary body along the sparsely populated street, feeling like she was about to collapse. That student was the strongest she had ever encountered. If he had only been mischievous, she could have handled it easily, but it was as if he had a knowledge filter in his head. He could solve math exam questions flawlessly, yet he couldn't even tell which dynasty Wu Zetian belonged to. She had no idea how his parents had educated him to have such a biased education. She sighed heavily. It seemed she would need to reorganize her teaching plan for the coming week. Liu straightened up, took a deep breath of fresh air, and instantly felt invigorated. Her steps became lighter. She thought her roommates would be worried since she was returning so late. At that moment, a street cleaner pushing a garbage cart approached her. He wore a very ordinary orange uniform, and the cart was covered with an oilcloth, the 2 wheels rolling on the road, making a clattering sound. Liu's expression suddenly turned cold. She could tell that this person was definitely not a cleaner. His clothes were too clean, almost like new. At the same time, her sensitive skin sensed a strong hostility emanating from the cleaner, surging like waves. She maintained her composure and continued walking forward, her steps and breathing unchanged, acting as though she knew nothing. The cleaner drew closer, eventually brushing past her. Li's eyes narrowed, and she quickly turned around, kicking the steel pipe out of his hand. Before he could react, her other foot shot out with a fierce wind, landing squarely on his knee. A crisp cracking sound echoed in the air as he screamed, falling backward and rolling on the ground, clutching his knee and curling up like a shrimp. Liu glanced at the garbage cart and flung the oilcloth aside, revealing a young girl in revealing clothes, tightly bound, with her mouth and eyes covered by black cloth, sound asleep. So you're the ones behind the recent string of missing girls. Liu shouted at the man on the ground. Who are you? What are you trying to do? Before she could finish her sentence, a chilling wind rushed in behind her, moving at an unbelievable speed. Even Liu couldn't help but change her expression. There was no time to dodge or jump aside. The only option was to She suddenly turned around, raising her arms to shield herself just as a heavy foot slammed against her arm with a crack. A wave of excruciating pain and force almost made her fall. She quickly stepped back a few paces to steady herself, but the shadow lunged at her again. It was a man wearing a thin linen suit and sunglasses, obscuring his features, but he appeared to be no longer young, perhaps in his 40s. However, his skills were anything but lacking. After engaging with him, Liu truly understood the meaning of the phrase, 40 is a man's golden age. He used a mysterious ancient boxing style, moving at an astonishing speed. Each move was precise yet varied, and Liu could barely keep up. A thrill of excitement surged from deep within her. Apart from her father, she had never encountered someone she could spar with for so long without losing, and it felt exhilarating. There were not many people in the world who could surpass Liu, most of whom were masters. Such elders wouldn't easily engage in a fight with someone like her. It had been a long time since she had fought so intensely. Clearly, the man felt the same way, his face displaying surprise as if he couldn't believe that an ordinary high school student could take so many of his blows while he was becoming increasingly strained. They exchanged over 100 moves, but as a woman, Liu finally felt the serious consequences of gender differences. Her stamina could not withstand this endless consumption. "Help me." At that moment, the cleaner on the ground weakly called out, extending his hand toward the middle-aged man. "Please help me." The middle-aged man was momentarily moved, feinting a strike toward Liu's calf. She blocked the feint, but her footing was unstable, forcing her to hurriedly retreat, her posture awkward. The middle-aged man seized the opportunity to leap beside the cleaner, hoisting him onto his shoulder and sprinting away at incredible speed toward the end of the long street. Liu didn't pursue him. She knew that continuing to engage would be detrimental, and besides, there was still a woman in the garbage truck. If she were tricked into leaving, it would be a loss. In any case, saving the person was the priority. Yang Sa opened her hazy eyes to find Zhu sitting quietly beside her, sipping tea. When she saw Yang Sa wake up, she smiled and said, "How was your sleep? Did you sleep well? How did I fall asleep?" Yang Sa scratched her head, feeling embarrassed. "That was really rude of me." "Not at all." Zhu handed her a cup of, saying, "How was your sleep just now? Did you dream?" "Dream?" A look of confusion crossed Yang Sa's eyes. "I think I had a very long dream." "Oh, what did you dream about?" Zhu asked excitedly, unable to hide her enthusiasm. Yang Sa's confusion deepened, as if a thick fog enveloped her mind. I forgot. Forgot. Zhu frowned slightly, her eyes revealing an unmistakable disappointment. Could it be that something was wrong with the tea? "What?" "No, it's nothing. Maybe it's better to forget." With a soft sigh, Yan Sa turned her head and saw Chu Man gazing mournfully at the purple clay teacup in front of her. It was hard to imagine she could have such an expression. Some things are better off forgotten. Chu Man raised her head and smiled sadly, her smile filled with millennia of sorrow, pain, and waiting. Forgetting is a gift bestowed by the Creator to all beings in their quest for happiness. Painful memories only bring more suffering. But some things, no matter how painful, people are unwilling to forget, Zhu said lightly. "You two should head back. It's already bright out." "What?" "It's bright already." Yan Sa was startled, and indeed, outside the window, it was already bright. The warm morning sunlight streamed in, casting patterns on the floor that mirrored the window's shape. "Have we really been sleeping for so long? Then we won't disturb you any longer," Chu Man said as she stood to leave. "Take care. Come visit when you can." Zhu smiled gently at Yang Sa, turning back to continue making tea. However, her hand trembled with excitement as she muttered to herself, "I knew you would come back. From the first moment I saw you, I knew you had finally returned." Jiaolan. Such a thing actually happened. Yen Sa exclaimed in disbelief, looking at Liu, who was sitting on the bed eating bread. You actually encountered those shameless human traffickers. Yeah, Liu bit down hard on a piece of bread. She had expended too much energy yesterday and needed to replenish herself today. What happened to the girl now? Siren was always the calmest one, unfazed even in the face of danger. She's fine, in the hospital, Liu said, chewing her bread, her words muffled. The police came, but she didn't know anything. She was just knocked out while using the restroom. Ha ha. A silvery laugh sent chills down Yang Sa's spine. Chu-Man smiled knowingly. It seems like a very interesting matter. Now we have some fun ahead. After weighing her options, Yen Sa finally went to the address listed in the recruitment ad. Although Chu-Man told her that the ghost bar was located at the end of Isan Road on the most famous Finghua Street in Weiwa City, where various dance halls, discos, and bars thrived, filled with all kinds of people, and where it was very unsafe for young single girls, she decided to give it a try for the sake of her future livelihood. At worst, she could ask Chu-Man for help later. The ghost bar was not large, but its decor was rich in postmodern style, with abstract paintings on the walls. As Yen Sa stepped inside, the bar seemed closed during the day, and the hall felt empty. A huge round chandelier reflected the sunlight, which was somewhat blinding. A girl in a uniform approached her. The uniform resembled a men's suit, consisting of a shirt, a vest, and long pants, with a black bow tie around her neck, a very traditional uniform. May I ask who you're looking for? The girl asked politely. I'm here to apply for the waitress position. Follow me. The girl led her through the dance floor and up a flight of stairs. The second floor appeared to be private rooms, and the hallway was luxuriously decorated, with a red carpet, white patterned wallpaper, and high-end wall lamps, clearly not affordable for the average person. We're here. The waitress stopped in front of a door carved with geometric patterns, lightly knocking twice before saying, "Manager, someone is here for the interview." "Let her in," said a deep male voice, rich and magnetic, carrying an implicit authority that made one feel a tinge of respect. "Yes." The waitress grasped the doorknob and opened the door, saying, "You can go in now." Yang Sa stepped into the room, surprised by its unexpectedly simple decor. There was a cabinet, a sofa, a curved table, a swivel chair, and 2 flower pots. This was all there was in the office. Sitting on the swivel chair was a man in his 40s, dressed in a black linen suit. His hair was neatly styled, and although his face showed signs of age, he still had a handsome appeal. He exuded a lazy air, but his eyes sparkled with a chilling intensity that made Yang Sa feel a bit apprehensive. "So you're the one applying to work at our bar?" the man asked. "Yes. Why do you want to work at our bar?" I just moved to the city for college, and I'm struggling financially. I'm looking for a part-time job." The man nodded slightly, sizing Yang Sa up from head to toe. Then he pulled out a form from his drawer and handed it to her. "Fill this out, and you can start working tonight." Yang Sa was taken aback. Did that mean she got the job? Was it that simple? Seeing her mouth agape in disbelief, the man chuckled. "What? You don't want to work here?" No. Yang Sa quickly took the form. "I'll definitely be there on time tonight." "Good. You may leave now." "Thank you, manager." Yang Sa walked out cheerfully but turned back at the door to ask, "May I know your name?" "My last name is Xia." "Manager Xia, I'll take my leave now." Yang Sa bowed slightly and gently closed the door. As soon as she did, Manager Xia's expression turned cold, his eyes filled with an icy glare. Before Yang Sa was a towering peak. As she looked out, she saw lush green trees almost covering the entire mountain, but there was no visible path leading up. The steep cliffs were nearly vertical, covered in the ancient pines, stacked upon each other, creating a dark green expanse from a distance. At the top of the peak, where the mountains rose and the clouds swirled, she could vaguely see the outlines of palatial buildings, floating in the clouds like a celestial mirror. Yang Sa stood at the foot of the mountain, gazing up at the majestic yet elegant palace, and she felt a vague memory stirring beneath the surface of her mind. Where was she? Why did the scenery feel so familiar? Suddenly, she felt her body become incredibly light, as if she were walking on clouds, drifting toward the summit. A rush of wind whooshed past her ears, and the air around her was filled with a faint floral fragrance, intoxicating her senses. In the brief moment of distraction, she found herself standing atop the mountain, her feet firmly planted on the hard rock, feeling more grounded than ever before. The floral scent intensified, and Yang Sa steadied herself, looking up to see a vast expanse of flowers blooming like a colorful ocean. As the gentle breeze swept through, it created soft waves of blossoms. Light petals danced in the air like butterflies, and the mingling scents of various flowers didn't feel overwhelming or annoying. Instead, they brought a refreshing sense of joy. The sunlight gleamed brightly over the flower fields, and Yang Sa raised her hand to shield her eyes from the intense light as she gazed at the palace surrounded by blossoms. The corridors twisted gracefully, the eaves soared high, and the tiles seemed to flutter like feathers, exuding an indescribable brilliance and grandeur. As Yang Sa walked through the flower field and approached the palace, she looked up to see a plaque hanging over the intricately carved door, inscribed with 3 characters in seal script. Even the palace itself seemed to be shrouded in mist, with the elegant writing blurring within the haze. The Mist Screen Palace. The Mist Screen Palace? A sudden wave of thoughts surged within Yang Sa, crashing against the gates of her mind, as if trying to draw out the secrets hidden deep within her heart. Suddenly, the door opened silently, as if it were weightless, made of paper. A woman stepped out from inside, holding a dewy lily. She wore a bright red palace dress, her hair styled in a cloud bun, with a jade hairpin slanting to one side. A strange pattern appeared on her forehead, enchanting yet eerie. For some reason, Yang Sa couldn't make out her features clearly. She just felt that the woman was extraordinarily beautiful, with a dignified grace that was captivating enough to mesmerize anyone. "You finally returned," the woman in red said, walking gracefully towards Yang Sa. Even at such close proximity, her face seemed shrouded in mist, making it hard to see clearly. She placed the lily into Yang Sa's hands and said, "Jialan, I have been waiting for you. I knew you would come back." Just as she finished speaking, the surroundings suddenly darkened, as if a clear sky had been abruptly covered by thick clouds. A wave of darkness surged rapidly through the flower field, consuming the colorful, vibrant world in an instant. The once vibrant and fragrant realm transformed into a dead silence. The flower field was left with nothing but fallen branches and yellow leaves, and the magnificent palace became a series of crumbling ruins, turning paradise into hell. The woman in the bright red palace dress still stood before Yang Sa, but her clothing was now tattered, her long hair disheveled, and her hazy face was smeared with blood. The enchanting and eerie pattern on her forehead seemed to have 2 intersecting gashes, deep enough to see bone, with flesh hanging out. The blood on her face appeared to flow from those gruesome wounds, trickling down her pale cheeks and gathering into droplets at her chin, falling to the ground and sinking into the pitch-black soil. A wave of pain surged through Yang Sa's chest, pouring out like an ocean. She looked at the lone woman standing there, wanting to call her name, but unable to speak. She wanted to rush over and embrace her, to heal her wounds, but her body felt as if it were filled with lead, unable to move. She could only watch helplessly as blood flowed from her, while she herself was powerless. Yang Sa sat up suddenly, staring blankly at the small bookshelf in the corner of the room. She gripped the blanket tightly around her, her eyes hazy, tears already wetting her thin nightgown. "What's wrong? Did you have a nightmare?" A pleasant female voice came from beside her. Yang Sa turned her head to see Chu Man putting on black fishnet stockings, dressed in a black lace slip dress that revealed a hint of her firm chest and pure white thighs, looking very seductive, her eyes filled with an alluring charm. At that moment, Yang Sa felt that she looked like a real vixen. "What's wrong? Are you stunned?" Chu Man, having finished putting on her stockings, moved closer to Yang Sa, her lips curling into her usual enigmatic smile. "What kind of dream could make you cry like this? Did you dream of a handsome man, the only one from the heavens, and when you confessed your love, he rejected you because he thought you were ugly? Do you think I'm ugly?" Yang Sa felt a surge of anger. How could she be considered ugly? Looking at this mischievous vixen, she felt like she could punch her in the face. What are you dressed like this for? Going on a date? Trying to catch a rich old man? No matter how old he is, he's just a little ghost in front of me, Chu Man said nonchalantly, grinning mischievously at her. "You're really heartless. I'm going to accompany you to work. Hurry up and get dressed, or you'll be late." "Accompany me to work?" Yang Sa was dumbfounded. "Yes, didn't you know? I'm now the resident singer at the Ghost Bar." Yang Sa nearly choked. With this old trickster causing trouble, her future looked bleak. The bar at night was noisy and chaotic. The rotating laser lights hanging from the ceiling cast a multitude of colorful, fragmented lights, bathing the entire bar in an exceptionally ambiguous glow. In the center of the hall was a stage where a band was energetically performing, their heavy metal music amplified to a deafening volume. A few scantily clad girls danced vigorously in front of the stage, their movements showcasing their slender figures and lively spirits. One girl seemed to be the lead dancer, wearing a black lace dress. Every one of her movements was passionate, her limbs appearing extremely supple and delicate as she performed, resembling a work of art, a level of intensity that was unmatched. The entire bar seemed to be captivated by her passionate dance, swaying in sync with the pulsing lights, many already drenched in sweat yet unwilling to stop. Yang Sa struggled to carry a large tray filled with several bottles of XO, which felt incredibly heavy. As she busily served drinks to the customers, she couldn't help but glance at the stage. Though she was reluctant, she had to admit that Chomin's dancing was impeccable. She had also been the lead dancer in the Bawa tribe's ceremonial dance before. Although that dance was different from this lively one, she understood her own limitations. She simply couldn't compare to her. So what if she can dance? Yang Sa gritted her teeth and said, "You've probably been a fox for hundreds of years, and with all that time to learn, how could you not be good? Give me a few hundred years, and I'm sure I'd be better than you." After a moment of self-soothing, she finally managed to suppress her frustrations. Just then, she noticed a man. He was a very handsome man, dressed in a Hugo Boss suit, exuding an air of authority. His demeanor and smile turned a small, unremarkable table in the corner of the bar into a castle. Yang Sa paused. Why would someone with such noble bearing come to a bar like this? From his attire, he seemed more suited for high-end hotels, arriving in a stretch limousine. Why was he in this chaotic place? Lost in thought, she suddenly heard a nearby table of customers loudly cursing her, demanding that she hurry up with their drinks. This snapped her back to reality, and she quickly served the 2 bottles of alcohol, her arms already aching from the wait. When Yang Sa looked up again, the man was drinking. He elegantly brought the glass to his lips, yet his eyes were fixed on Chu Man dancing passionately on stage, never leaving her for a moment. Yang Sa frowned. Her impression of him dropped significantly. She had thought he was a noble gentleman, but it seemed he was just another lecher. Chu Man, oh Chu Man, It appeared another man would be heartbroken over you. She sighed and turned back to the bar to fetch more drinks. Just then, a new song ended, and the stage switched to a few new dancers, performing a slower piece. Chu Man returned backstage, wiping the sweat from her body. The people around her praised her, saying her dancing was unparalleled. She simply smiled slightly and didn't pay much attention. Little did she know, her fox-like charm was irresistibly captivating, and a few men were already enchanted, completely spellbound. Chu Man was accustomed to the faces of men in the world and didn't think much of it. She turned and came out from backstage to the bar to grab a drink, all the while watching Yang Sa struggle with the heavy tray in the crowd, a smirk of schadenfreude growing on her lips. Suddenly, her expression froze as her gaze landed on a handsome man in the corner of the bar, dressed in Hugo Boss, exuding an imposing presence. Her eyes locked onto him, as if deep brown waves were swirling beneath his gaze. After a long moment, she managed to force a smile, composing herself and returning to her enchanting demeanor as she walked toward him. "Excuse me," she began with a smile. The man seemed to have anticipated her approach, showing no surprise. He merely looked at her with a cold gaze, waiting for her to continue. "Could you buy me a drink?" After she finished speaking, she flashed him a smile that seemed to carry a magical allure. A simple smile from her was enough to make any man fall at her feet, willingly risking everything for her. However, the man only smiled slightly, seemingly unfazed. "Sure, that would be my honor." Chu Man happily sat beside him, leaning in closer, bringing her lips to his ear, whispering softly, "Who are you?" The man wrapped his arm around her waist and turned to meet her gaze, their faces mere inches apart. He smiled back, softly replying, "Shouldn't I be the one asking you? Who are you, and what is your purpose here, little fox?" Chu Man was taken aback. Despite hiding her true nature so well, he was able to see through her disguise. It seemed this man's cultivation was far superior to hers, causing her heart to tremble slightly. She thought, this man must also be a monster, but what kind? Why was he here? Was he here to feed? With that thought, she regretted coming to see him. It was common for monsters to drain each other's spiritual energy. He couldn't be after her, could he? But the way he spoke didn't sound like it. Was he here for that thing? "Little fox, answer my question." The man continued to speak softly, his gentle smile masking the killing intent in his eyes. To an outsider, they merely appeared to be flirting, but Chu Man knew well that there was a deadly seriousness behind it. If she didn't come clean, he might kill her immediately. Though her skills were not weak, and she could perhaps exchange a few blows before trying to escape, there were too many people here. How would it end if a fight broke out? Just as she was caught in this dilemma, an icy chill suddenly loomed before them. Both were startled, and the man felt a sense of surprise. Why was someone approaching without him sensing it? Chu Man looked up and saw Yang Sa standing there with a bottle of frozen French red wine, a mischievous smile on her face. It turned out that she had seen the two of them being intimate and thought Chu Man was trying to seduce the man. So, she came over to disrupt things, ruining her good fortune by placing the wine bottle between their faces. Unexpectedly, she ended up helping Chu Man immensely. "Here's your wine, sir," Yang Sa said with a smile. The man looked up at her, feeling a sinking sensation in his chest, and instinctively tightened his fist resting on the table. He couldn't help but find it strange why he felt this way. This feeling, it felt like fear. Thinking of this word made his expression change slightly. In all his years, he had never been afraid of anyone, so why was he so intimidated by this little human girl? While he was in a daze, Chu Man quickly stood up and pulled Yang Sa away. Confused, Yang Sa was dragged quite a distance before she managed to break free and said angrily, "What are you doing? Are you mad that I interrupted your little game? Let's not talk about good or bad fortune right now. This is a huge mess, not good at all," Chu Man frowned. "I need to leave now," You must be very careful around that man. If you can avoid him, do so. Otherwise, I'm afraid I won't be able to protect you." With that, before Yang Sa could respond, she slung her handbag over her shoulder and quickly exited the bar. Yang Sa looked at her retreating figure in confusion, then turned to glance at the man, only to find him staring back at her. She quickly averted her gaze, thinking to herself, "What is going on here?" As Chu Man stepped out of the bar, a layer of cold sweat broke out on her forehead. It was already late at night, and the streetlights cast a dim yellow glow on either side. It was mid-autumn now. The weather had been hot during the day, but at night, a faint chill seeped up from the ground, slowly penetrating into her bones, making her feel somewhat cold. The cold sweat on Chuman's body intensified as the wind blew, but she remained oblivious, her mind only on that handsome man. What kind of monster was he? She could sense the monstrous aura emanating from him, but it was faint, so faint that it was almost undetectable. At first, she thought this man had such weak monster energy that he was just a newly transformed little monster. Little did she know, after just one conversation, she felt a powerful aura surging towards her like a flood, making her tremble uncontrollably. Chu Man had been cultivating for 930 years and had encountered countless monsters of all kinds, but never had anyone made her feel such fear. If she wasn't mistaken, his cultivation must be over 2,000 years, and that he was a spirit beast. Spirit beasts are strange creatures that lived in ancient times. The ancient era was a mythical age where spiritual energy was extremely strong, naturally giving rise to many powerful monsters, such as the nine-tailed fox among the fox species, which is one of the spirit beasts. Most of the monsters recorded in the Shan Haijing are spirit beasts. However, as humanity flourished and spiritual energy diminished, most spirit beasts retreated to other worlds. The man she saw today, with his cultivation, was surely an elite among spirit beasts. Suddenly, her expression froze as she looked up, scanning her surroundings. There wasn't a soul in sight, only the low sound of the wind, the silence so thick it was suffocating. She trembled as she clenched her fists, feeling as if the air around her was pressing in like four hard, cold walls, making her hands and feet feel icy, rendering her unable to move. She scolded herself for being so foolish. She had been too absorbed in thinking about that man and hadn't realized she had walked into someone else's barrier. Realizing this, she closed her eyes and tried to channel her internal energy into her limbs, but the power of the barrier was too strong. Even with her efforts, all she could manage was to stop her hands and feet from trembling. "Come out," she said coldly, raising her voice. "Who's trying to set me up?" As soon as she finished speaking, a middle-aged man in a thin linen suit stepped out. Chu Man couldn't tell where he had come from, and her brows furrowed in confusion. "Are you a fox?" The middle-aged man smiled slightly, a knowing look in his eyes. "How interesting. From your aura, it seems quite impressive. Who are you?" Chuman's face darkened, quietly gathering her energy in her hand, condensing it in her right palm. "What do you want from me? I don't remember ever meeting you. You just danced in my bar. How could you not recognize me?" The man had a meaningful smile on his face, which sent a chill down her spine. What a pity you're not a nine-tailed fox. Otherwise, my adoptive father would be quite pleased. Chu Man was taken aback. Who was this man? He didn't seem like a monster, but he had set up this barrier against monsters. Could he be a cultivator? Who was the adoptive father he mentioned? What exactly do you want? Chu Man tightened her grip on her right hand, ready to unleash her power. My adoptive father enjoys collecting monsters, the middle-aged man said with a smile. There aren't many 900-year-old monsters around. I'm afraid you'll have to come back with me to meet him. He will surely make you a golden cage, which will suit a beautiful white fox like you perfectly. Collecting monsters? Chu Man was momentarily stunned. She had never heard of anyone having such a hobby. Monsters were not something that humans could afford to keep. Didn't he worry about bringing disaster upon himself? "Miss, what do you say?" the middle-aged man asked politely. "Come with me." "Humph." Chu-Man sneered, a surge of killing intent rising from her heart. Her eyes filled with murderous energy, and she raised her right hand, conjuring a white energy ball in her palm, which crackled with lightning. The air around them became turbulent, as if being sucked into the energy ball, forming a massive vortex that drew everything toward it. "You arrogant human!" Chu-Man's enchanting face appeared eerily illuminated by the white light, her eyes filled with a cold, murderous intent that caused the surrounding leaves to flutter down. She hurled the energy ball at the middle-aged man, coldly saying, "Since you're seeking your own death, I won't hold back. Here it comes." A look of astonishment flashed across the middle-aged man's face, as he hadn't expected Chu-Man to gather such power, even under the pressure of the barrier. He instinctively stepped back. Yang Sa took a bottle of red wine from the bartender, suddenly pausing, almost dropping the bottle. The bartender nearly jumped out of his skin, anxiously saying, "Good heavens, that's a vintage from 1968. If you drop it, we'll be paying for it for the rest of our lives." Yang Sa seemed to ponder for a moment as she looked outside the bar and said, "Qin Shuang, did you feel a tremor just now?" "Tremor? What tremor?" "It felt like an earthquake." Yang Sa frowned slightly. "An earthquake?" Chen Shuang exclaimed dramatically, "Don't scare me. We're not in an earthquake-prone area. There hasn't been one here in hundreds of years. Are you just tired and imagining things? Do you need to rest? Maybe it really was my imagination." Yang Sa carried the expensive red wine towards the staircase leading to the second floor. This valuable wine had been ordered by a customer in a private room, and anyone who could afford such wine must be a wealthy young master. As she climbed the carpeted stairs, she couldn't shake the feeling of the earlier tremor. It had felt so real, like the ground was shaking beneath her feet, as if a tremendous force from broken rocks was being transmitted up to her. The sensation was too vivid for her to believe it was just her imagination. Perhaps there had been a strong earthquake somewhere far away, maybe in a mountain village or a city. As she thought about this, her body stiffened suddenly when a strange image appeared before her, broken rocks shooting up from the ground, dust and debris filling the air, as if it were the end of the world. In that chaotic storm of debris stood two figures, indistinct but appearing to be a man and a woman. The woman was dressed in dark clothing, her graceful figure seeming familiar. "Chu-Man," Yang Sa suddenly exclaimed, losing her footing and stumbling forward, causing the wine to fly from her hands. Her mind went blank, and she instinctively reached out to grasp the wall beside her. With a rip, she managed to tear a piece of the thick wallpaper down, but her knee still hit the stairs hard, causing her to gasp in pain. At that moment, a strong hand suddenly gripped her arm, helping her up. She turned to see that it was the handsome man in designer clothes. "Are you hurt?" And no. Looking at his handsome face, Yang Sa was momentarily dazed, answering without thinking. In reality, her knee had scraped and was bleeding slightly, but her long, thick pants concealed it. The man's expression suddenly turned serious as his gaze fixed on the corner of the wall. Yang Sa felt confused and followed his gaze, discovering that a piece of greenstone was embedded in the wall beneath the torn wallpaper. The stone was about the size of a pebble, firmly set in the wall, emitting a faint glow. Curiosity piqued, Yang Sa leaned in to examine it closely and asked, "What is this?" "It's a barrier," the man murmured, his voice low. Yang Sa didn't catch it clearly. Blinking in confusion, she asked, "What did you just say?" Before he could respond, an angry voice shouted, "Who smashed my wine?" At that moment, Yang Sa realized she no longer held the red wine, and her face turned pale with fear. She recalled the bartender Chen Shuang's words, "We'll never be able to pay for it in our lifetime." Never be able to pay for it? She felt a wave of darkness wash over her, nearly fainting, only to hear the angry voice suddenly turn to surprise. Yang Sa, what are you doing here? Yang Sa looked up to see a face she recognized all too well. Xu Yunfei, she exclaimed, her mouth open in shock. What are you doing here? This is a question I should be asking you. Why are you here? I'm working here, serving drinks to customers. As she looked at the shattered wine bottles scattered across the stairs, Yang Sa's voice trailed off, and she quickly covered her ears with her hands. Turns out you're the one who broke my 1968 La Roman, eh? Xu Yunfei shouted. Do you know how much that bottle of wine is worth? He continued, seated in the luxurious private room, his face filled with anger, while Lei Hao beside him was enjoying snacks and watching the drama unfold with amusement. I. Yan Sa stood before Xu Yunfei like a guilty schoolgirl, her head lowered, unable to say a word. At that moment, she just wanted to bang her head against the wall. Why did she have to provoke someone like him? This year had truly been unlucky for her. After finally finding a decent part-time job, she got into such huge trouble on her first day. There was no way she could ever repay for that bottle of wine. Her life felt like it was over. What about you? Xu Yunfei snapped. You tell me how you're going to repay me for the wine. Stop with the and dot. Lei Hao chimed in with a sarcastic remark. Looking at you, it's clear you can't afford it. Why not sell yourself to the Chu family as a servant to pay off your debt? We don't need any more servants, Xu Yunfei interjected before Yang Sa could protest. Besides, if I let her work for my family, I'm afraid all the antiques my father collects would be broken within 3 days. Yang Sa wanted to argue that she wasn't that careless, but remembering that her life was in this man's hands, she swallowed her words. Just then, a knock sounded at the door. Xu Yunfei coldly said, "Come in." The door opened, and the manager of the ghost bar walked in. He bowed to Xu Yunfei, saying, "Mr. Chu, I sincerely apologize for the losses caused by our mistake. Please rest assured, we will compensate you." "No need," Xu Yunfei said, glancing at Yang Sa. "I'll pay for the wine, but the rest is between me and Miss Yang." Looking into his fierce gaze, Yang Sa knew her future was truly bleak. When Yang Sa returned to Qinyuan building, it was already the next morning. Li seemed to have just gotten up, practicing martial arts on the balcony with a twig. Seeing Yang Sa's clouded expression, she asked curiously, "What's wrong? Did work not go well? Or did someone bully you?" "You're spot on," Yang Sa said, feeling completely drained as she collapsed onto the bed. How can one person be so unlucky? This is truly a once-in-a-century occurrence. You can still joke about it. I guess I don't have to worry about you committing suicide, Liu laughed, continuing her practice. Yang Sa secretly cursed her for being so carefree, pulled the blanket over herself, and planned to sleep well. However, just as she was about to close her eyes, Siren walked in and patted her shoulder, asking, "Aza, where's Chu Man? Chu Man?" Yang Sa was startled, sitting up suddenly. She left a long time ago. What? She hasn't come back yet? I haven't seen her since she left the dorm last night, Siren said, frowning slightly as she sat down beside Yang Sa. After a long pause, she continued, "Aza, do you know that there was a localized earthquake in Weiwa City yesterday? Several houses collapsed." "An earthquake?" Yang Sa's expression changed, and the image from last night flashed through her mind. Chu Man and a man facing each other amidst the flying debris. She could never see the man's face, but his figure seemed somewhat familiar. She should be okay, right? Yang Sa said uncertainly. Chu Man was a fox who had been cultivating for many years. She shouldn't be attacked, right? But what if the other party wasn't an ordinary person? Siren didn't say anything, only furrowing her brows as she stood up and walked out. Yan Sa stood there, momentarily at a loss. Just then, Liu walked in, glancing at Siren's retreating figure and asked, "What happened? Is there a problem?" Yang Sa pondered for a moment, then got to her feet and said, "Xiaoyu, come with me." "Where to?" "To the place where the localized earthquake happened last night." It was a very remote community, mostly surrounded by old, dilapidated buildings about to be demolished. The corners were filled with dirty garbage, emitting a nauseating stench. Such places were usually deserted, and after the earthquake, it had become a no-go zone. No one dared to venture near. As Yang Sa and Liu entered the street, they were taken aback to see a large circular pit in the center of the road, with cracks spreading outwards like a spider web, surrounded by shattered stone fragments. It looked as if a meteor had crashed into the ground, with the surrounding houses, already in terrible condition, now reduced to rubble. Liu exclaimed in astonishment, "What kind of earthquake could cause this?" "It's not an earthquake." Yang Sa walked around the pit. It was quite shallow, filled with trash. She squatted down to take a closer look and pulled out an object from the rubble, lifting it up to her eyes. It turned out to be a diamond earring, its smooth facets sparkling in the sunlight. "This earring belongs to Chu Man," Liu gasped. "This street is a shortcut back to Tsinghua Academy. Chu Man must have been trying to return to school and was ambushed instead." Yang Sa tightly clutched the earring in her hand, the hard diamond digging into her palm painfully. Who could have attacked Chu Man? Who had the power to do so? And what was their motive for attacking her? Suddenly, the image of the handsome man from last night flashed through her mind. Could it be? Liu noticed the fluctuating expressions on her face and placed a hand on her shoulder, asking worriedly, "What's wrong? Did you think of something?" "I don't know, maybe." Yan Sa lowered her head, and suddenly it seemed she recalled something. She looked up excitedly and said, "Maybe there's someone who can help us." The antique shop was filled with the aroma of green tea. Zhu Yan used a porcelain spoon to scoop some tea leaves into a purple clay teapot, displaying a hint of surprise. "You're saying Chu Man was attacked and is now missing?" "Yes," Yang Sa nodded. Liu sat beside her, gazing in astonishment at the beautiful woman in a pink robe with a cloud bun, feeling as if she had stepped into a time tunnel and returned to ancient times. This woman looked like a fairy who had walked out from a painting. When did Asa meet her? What connection did she have with Chu Man? Zhu Yan seemed to notice Liu's scrutiny and looked up, offering her a gentle smile. In her deep eyes, there seemed to be some unknown essence that made Liu feel as if this woman could see through her past and present, perceiving her reincarnation. She quickly lowered her head to avoid Zhu Yan's gaze. For some reason, she couldn't meet her eyes. "Zhu Yan, you have to help us," Yang Sa said anxiously. "We have no clues and don't know where to start." "What do you want me to do?" Zhu Yan asked, a faint smile playing on her lips, her expression inscrutable. "You've known Chu Man for a long time, right? Do you know if she has any enemies?" "Enemies?" Zhu Yan couldn't help but laugh, serving tea to the two of them. "She's lived for over 900 years. She has more enemies than you can count. Where would you even begin?" Yang Sa hesitated slightly and asked, "Is there a man in his 30s who is very handsome?" "A handsome man?" Zhu Yan smiled and said, "If he's a monster, he can look as handsome as he wishes. For monsters, power is everything. Only humans judge by appearances." Yang Sa furrowed her brows. Whether that man was human or monster, she didn't know. If he were truly a monster, being an ordinary mortal, what could she possibly do? Perhaps in the end, she would just become a meal for him. Perhaps there is such a thing as telepathy. Liu seemed to immediately pick up on Yang Sa's worries. She gently grasped her hand, and when Yang Sa looked up, she saw Liu's comforting smile. Her heart stirred. Such a smile felt familiar, as if she had seen it long ago. Many years ago, someone had smiled at her like this, and that simple smile had given her boundless strength. Zhu Yan glanced at Liu and said with interest, "What? Do you believe there are monsters in this world?" "Some things don't cease to exist just because I don't believe in them," Liu replied with a hint of meaning. The world is vast and there are wonders everywhere. I've never believed that humans are the only beings in this world. Good, Zhuyan laughed. In that case, I'll help you. Saying this, she slowly walked to the window, pushed open the flower-patterned window, and focused. In the west, there is the aura of green stones. It should be a barrier set by a master. Within this barrier, no monstrous power can be exerted, and without the permission of the one who set it, monsters cannot even step inside. Azza, did you see any green stones where the barrier was set yesterday? Green stones? Yang Sa quickly recalled the green stone embedded in the wall and exclaimed, "Yes, I saw it. It was a translucent green stone." "That's right," Zhuyan said. "That stone is the critical point of the formation. There should be 5 more stones at the places where you see it, together forming a hexagram barrier. There aren't many who can set up such a formation. It requires a high level of cultivation. The only person who could attack Chu-Man is probably him. So, how do we break this barrier?" Yang Sa and Liu asked in unison. "It's simple," Zhu Yan said, a strange smile flitting across her face. "You just need to remove the stone from the wall." Zhu Yan sat beside a round wooden table painted red, holding a silk fan embroidered with peonies and colorful butterflies. She looked at the 2 cups of steaming tea on the table, the fragrance of tea wafting through the air, while the bamboo curtain gently swayed. A slight smile adorned her lips, giving her face a gentle beauty. "The green stone is not something an ordinary person can move," she said softly, her gaze becoming slightly distant as if recalling memories from many years ago. Those ancient memories flowed through her mind like a gentle stream, warming her world as if it were spring again. "But you can do it, Jalan. Only you can." As Yen Sa and Li walked back to school, both wore furrowed brows. After a long silence, Liu finally said, "What do you plan to do next? What else can we do?" "Of course, we'll continue looking for the green stones in the bar," Yang Sa sighed. "The one we found is too conspicuous. It would be harder than climbing to the sky to remove it unnoticed." "Didn't Zhu Yan say there are 6 in total? If we can find one in a more secluded location, it would be much easier." "Azza," Li said after a moment of contemplation, "if a stone the size of a fist is embedded in the corridor, just as you said, it's too conspicuous. It would be nearly impossible to remove it without the bar owner's permission." Yang Sa was taken aback, raising her head to look at Liu, her brows tightening further. "Are you saying Manager Xie is involved in this?" As soon as she spoke, she gasped, the image of the debris-filled scene from last night resurfacing in her mind. The figure of the man in a suit hovered in the air, becoming clearer, and that face, it was Manager Xie. "What's wrong, Azza?" Liu asked curiously. "Did you remember something?" "Xiaoyu, you're right." Yang Sa grabbed her wrist and said, "The person who attacked Chu-Man is indeed Manager Xie from the Ghost Bar." Chu-Man felt as if she were lying on a cloud, her body light and surrounded by a vast expanse of white, reminiscent of the primordial chaos at the dawn of creation. A faint fragrance lingered in the air, a scent she seemed to have smelled before but couldn't quite recall, her mind blank. In this seemingly endless whiteness, she thought she heard the distant sound of silk and bamboo instruments, harmonious and grand, luxurious and resplendent. Her heart stirred. This familiar yet strange melody felt like a distant memory from another world. Yes, she had experienced this before. Golden palaces, beautifully dressed dancers, musicians with instruments, sweet melodies filling the air, and an enchanting fragrance permeating the atmosphere. In this dreamlike realm, surrounded by eager gazes, she danced gracefully. At that time, she felt as light as a butterfly, every movement radiating allure, capturing the attention of the exalted king. How long ago was that? Over 1,000 years, perhaps? Back then, she wasn't a fox. She was just an ordinary dancer performing in the palace. She was the most beautiful among the dancers. Even the elderly emperor was infatuated with her. such favor was not a blessing but a curse. It was the Emperor's love that turned her from a mortal into a fox spirit. Xiumen opened her eyes to find herself inside a massive cage. It was indeed a cage, an extremely beautiful white bird cage, but it was many times larger than a typical bird cage, with a pointed top, European-style railings, and wind chimes dangling from the top that produced a clear sound when moved. Xiumen was trapped in such a cage, and outside it was a very large room, built like a Western palace. The ceiling was painted with scenes from Greek mythology, and the walls were adorned with luxurious wallpaper. In this room, there were various bird cages, each containing a monster. Some had revealed their true forms, some were half human, half monster, while others appeared as ordinary humans but radiated overwhelming monstrous energy. At that moment, Xiumen remembered she had been captured. On that small path, she had fallen into an ambush set by a middle-aged man. She had fought against him while her powers were restricted. She didn't know what kind of treasure he held, but he could reflect her attacks back at her. Fortunately, he didn't intend to kill her. Otherwise, she would have been reduced to a pile of flesh by now. "It seems you've woken up," a very old voice came from behind her. Xiumen was startled and turned her head to see an extremely elderly man sitting in the corner of the room. He was almost curled up on a sofa, his long white hair very thick. But his face revealed his age, covered with deep wrinkles resembling tree bark, layered upon one another, making it nearly impossible to discern his original features. He looked extremely old, probably over 100 years. "You're Fox, aren't you?" the old man said in a low, hoarse voice. Xiumen felt he was nearing the end of his life. Could he be the adoptive father that the middle-aged man mentioned? "Who are you?" Xiumen said coldly. "Why did you bring me here? What do you want?" "I mean no harm," the old man replied calmly, his tone revealing no emotion. "I simply have a hobby of collecting monsters. It wasn't I who captured you, but my adopted son. You should have seen him. His name is Xia Xianhao." Xia Xianhao. Xiumen's brows knitted together. She had seen that name in the dance contract, so the middle-aged man was indeed the owner of the ghost bar. "Do you know that what you're doing is very dangerous?" Xiumen looked at him, a cold smile creeping onto her lips. "Collecting so many monsters, aren't you afraid we might band together against you?" "You can try." The old man raised his left hand and snapped his fingers. A beautiful woman stepped out from behind him. Only then did Xiumen realize that the beautifully carved wall behind him was actually a door. Who is this mysterious woman? Please subscribe to the channel to watch the next episode. Goodbye and see you again.